Welcome to the Dragonfly Rising podcast. I am your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Thank you for joining me today as we continue to work together to make a difference. Let's explore how we can use our voice today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dragonfly Rising podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Today, we have a couple amazing guests with us. We have Dr. Kevin Taylor and Dr. Bre Evans-Santiago, hailing from California, joining us today. They are the co-directors of the California State University Center for Transformational Educator Preparation Programs. We are doing some amazing work on those campuses, recruiting, preparing, retaining, and supporting educators of color across the state of California. So I'm really excited to talk with them today about what they're doing with this very important work. And I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. They both have some amazing bios. You can check that out in the podcast information to learn more about what they're doing and what they have done. I would love to have you each introduce yourself and, just share with everyone a little bit about your personal equity journey, like what brought you to this work. So who wants to go first?
All right.
It's Dr. Bre. All right.
Okay. Hi, everyone that's listening. Just to let you know a little bit about myself, I think it's important to just start also with who I bring into the room. So I just want to share, so my great grandmothers who have just really inspired me to be a strong Black woman in the presence of people and making that impact and continuing to fight the fight. So I always want to recognize them and their strength, in which I live by. But with that being said, when I say that I am a Black woman, some people speak to me in Spanish quite often in California because I do have lighter skin and because I do have curly hair. And so quite often my identity is skewed, or people may not know that I identify as a Black woman. And so that's a part of my equity work. That's a part of my journey. As I've grown up, I've been in various spaces. I grew up in Sacramento, California, until I was a teenager. And I there lived amongst minority students. So we were the majority, people of color, not just Black folks, but Black and Latino mostly, Asian as well. So there was a big mix, especially in Sacramento, close to the Bay Area, you have a big mix of minority students, what have you. But then throughout that journey, eventually I went to a new area in California. It's Elk Grove. Now it's no longer new, but at the time, Laguna Creek did not exist. I was one of the first houses ever built in Laguna Creek. And I went to a junior high school where everyone there was white and cowboy boots, cowboy hat. Like I did not fit. It was very uncomfortable for me. And that helped me see a different side, a lot of name calling, bullying, not understanding who I was, that type of thing. And having to work through that. Went back to my high school in Sacramento when my parents separated. So I was like, yes, be back with my people. And then I moved all the way to good old Illinois.
Hey.
I was a minority again. Mm-hmm. I lived in Bloomington, went to one of the most diverse high schools. So it was awesome for that, for sure. But just in the town itself, I experienced stuff that I wasn't used to. Being followed, being police stuff, getting pulled over for, I didn't know that we have light bulbs in our license plate holders. I didn't know that. But I got pulled over for that in good old Bloomington. So I was like, okay, all right. You just check it. You want to just find something with me, sir. So those types of things it was eye-opening for me. So when I finished my undergrad, I left. I went right back to California wherever I could get in. But my mom still lived in Illinois. So I came back for my doctoral degree years later. And my experience was completely different. In academia, I learned more about myself. I had another Black faculty. I've only had two Black teachers my whole life, and that was where I had one of them. And so I learned a lot about my own identity and, standing up for myself and learning about myself and who I really was, and digging into intersectionality or what have you. And so that put me on the path through my own life experiences to make sure that other students could have teachers that look like them, that other students would not feel less valued and things like that as
Mhm.
they're in school. And so my path, my journey, my love, my passion has been to support and help teachers ensure that they are making sure that their students feel a part of a class and feel valued and feel loved and feel like they matter. And so that's been my journey thus far. And I've taught all over the place in the process and am happy to bring that into our space right now in California as I work for the
Yeah.
chancellor's.
Wow, you know what, Bre I'm sorry, Kevin, just give me one because I didn't realize the depths of some of the parallels, right? Between you and I. I waited like 21 years in my education to come across another educator of in my experience, right? And the skewed who are you? What are you? Right?
Mhm,
And I talked about this in my Meet Dr. Tami episode, but like when people are confused or not sure how you fit in to whatever the identity is that they want to attach to you for whatever reason, right? Like people historically, and that's the problem, right? With like looking at someone and making an assumption about who they are, where they come from, and how they engage. But I hope we dig in a little bit more about that connection of being like this other in this dominant space too, because that changes how you think and view. I mean, it did for me. Like, I'm just saying, like, that relates I relate to that a lot, right? Because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood school system, and people were very confused about who is Tammy Dean, right? Everybody assumes that I am, Black, white, mixed racial heritage, which is not accurate at all. And that's just interesting. So I just wanted to talk about that. I just the power of experience, right? And how we bring our own experience to this work just is already permeating from what you shared. So I appreciate you sharing all of that background with us. And we don't want to forget about Dr. Taylor. So Dr. Taylor, let's meet you. What's going on with you? What have you been doing?
Excellent. Thank you. No, I enjoyed learning more about Brie and her background and you and about your background. And yeah, my background is very different from Brie's. I grew up in England. My mother was a teacher and a fierce advocate for kids that were struggling. And I think I took a lot from my mother. Certainly, um, became an ardent feminist. She was a strong force in my life. And as a high school teacher in England, I was really drawn to help students that some of my colleagues saw as problems and really sort of had this underlying sense that there's no such thing as a bad kid, it's just a kid making a bad decision. And that my job was to help them make good decisions. And so they made a bad decision. That's where education really begins, right? Um,
Yes. Well, shoot, that's humanity, right?
yeah,
Learning from
yeah,
decisions.
which is important in education.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
uh, so I sort of had that sense of the importance of equity in education from an early age, and certainly early in my professional career. Um, Long story short, I got itchy feet, wanted to travel. I came to the States to graduate school. I did a master's degree at Central Washington University and a doctoral degree at the University of South Carolina, and very different cultural experiences. And I was
Mhm.
looking for different cultural experiences in my travels and in my education. So I was very excited to go to South Carolina because I saw living in South Carolina as a part of my education.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very eye-opening. I remember reading Savage Inequalities by Jonathan Kozol, and it blew me away and really changed my perception of education in the States because I hadn't been exposed to the kind of schools that he was writing about. But that was really important. Fast forward a few years, and a few years in teacher ed, I worked in Colorado and then moved to California. And this is my 25th year at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. At interview, they asked me if I could teach the adapted physical education class because my background is physical education teacher ed. And I
Uh-huh.
said, no, there's no way I could teach that class. And that's important content. And if that's what this job's about, you should hire somebody else. So I was a little shocked when I got the job. I was even more shocked and actually mildly insulted when I found out I was teaching adapted physical education
No
through training.
way.
Because I'm like, no. Well,
You're like, I told you no.
yeah, I told you, and I genuinely believed this was such important content that you shouldn't have some nubbin that knows nothing about it teaching the class, right? And,
Absolutely.
so I chose to look at it as an opportunity rather than a predicament. I shared the story with my students every quarter and said that I was committed to modeling lifelong learning, and that I was an emerging expert, very slowly emerging at the beginning in adaptive physical activity. I then went on to study and work and get grants and do community work promoting physical activity for people with disabilities. I quickly figured out that what my students needed was a course in disability studies built
Mm.
into the context of physical activity programming. And I started reading sociologists from all over the world that were looking at disability studies and trying to weave that stuff in there. And you're from Texas, there was a very, very powerful author, Claudine Sherrill, who was in Texas, who was doing brilliant work in that area. And I read everything I could get my hands on from her. And I really got passionate about social justice education and found that in teaching disability studies and working in the area of adapted physical activity, I could use that as a vehicle to shine a light on other forms of prejudice, discrimination, oppression within our culture, and and really bring people along because there were people who were really nervous to work with people with disabilities. And
Mm-hmm.
through that process of getting them into the community and getting them working with people with disabilities, they got to see past the disability and connect with the human being. And I brought that into the classroom and really talked about it as how what they were doing was really exposing themselves to a different to difference, human difference, different
Mm-hmm.
experience, a different lens, a different culture, and that they shouldn't feel threatened by that at all in any way. They should just see that as something that they're not familiar with, and it's just an opportunity for growth. And
Yeah.
it became a very powerful way to open the students' minds and perspectives. It became very much more than just teaching adaptive physical activity, but it was fun and it changed me fundamentally as a professional and as a human being.
Wow. That's so powerful, right? The power of connection to another person's humanity. Like, and what I hear from that is, right, like seeing and acknowledging and learning to understand difference and differences. It's
Definitely.
good. It's
And,
it's
and
you know?
And in that context as well, we were looking at people in terms of their potential and
Mhm.
seeing what people could do, because our society looks at people with disabilities as less than and
Mhm.
tends to focus on people with disabilities, and our culture focuses way too much on what people can't do. And so all my work was focused with them on looking at what people could
Could
do
do.
and looking at creating equal status relationships with the people that they were working with. Um, and and again, I mean, in so many ways and so many layers, it was such a powerful way to address inequity and discrimination and oppression in other forms.
Yeah. Yeah. That asset view is, to me, and I don't know how you all feel about this, like, that's the bedrock
Yeah.
of equity work, right? How do we start noticing and naming the assets people bring
Yeah.
to wherever that is? I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
No, I think it's critically important. And they are the same, they're the same themes across everything. I remember I was doing all this work, and I heard a colleague of mine at social psychologist friend of mine here at Cal Poly talking about social justice. And all of a sudden, that was, I remember that was the first time I'd heard that those two words together. And I was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. I'm doing that. That's what I'm doing. And I was geeking out about what she was saying about social justice and scribbling down notes. And yeah, because it is the same. It's a theme runs throughout education.
And
Absolutely.
can I add to that too? Just real quick, thinking about how often students of color are criminalized as soon as they step in a space,
Mm,
right? Or people of color, honestly, not even
mhm.
it can follow thereafter. But thinking about these various ages that we walk into a space and people may not know, like how Kevin was saying, they just may not have the experience with folks. They may not know how to communicate with different people that, may not have grown up around them or that they understand. And immediately, instead of thinking of what people can bring in, they're already thinking of how to get them out or what they didn't bring in or what they're missing or that type of mentality. And it's so often that people of color are thought of as doing something wrong or being too different before we even have a chance to show what we can bring,
Oh,
right? And
yeah.
so I think assets help us to think about that, especially us as teacher educators, helping our new educators really hone into that and think about the silliest example of a student always banging on their desk, that we see the videos about that and what have you. And it's like, but are they musically sound? Is there a way that I can educate through UDL or through other components where this kid could now start to share and teach us or learn in another aspect that connects with their assets of being able to hear beats that I would never even think about or being able
Mhm.
to move in a way that I didn't know was possible. Like, so just really helping people see more than
Mm.
thinking, oh, this kid is trying to disrupt. And this kid is, we're always trying to, put people in a box that we know. And I think if we
Oh,
really help people learn about assets, that we may not know all the answers and we may not know all of what they will bring in, but like honing into that and keeping our eyes open and our ears open to learning from our people, from our students, from others around us, I think is huge, you know?
oh, absolutely, right? Like, you don't have to know all the answers. We can learn things from our students, and your personal way of knowing, being, and moving and acting through the world isn't the only way to do that, right? And I think to me, like, this is like that compliance assimilation, right? There's like one way to do this. And the challenge in education, and I'm sure this connects to why you all have your center, is because, right, historically, educational spaces are geared for white, middle class norms, families, expectations, and that there's only this one right way to engage as a person
Mhm.
in this space, right?
And
So where's
oh,
the space, right? And
mhm,
how is it so it's not a safe space for marginalized communities and people of color or difference, oftentimes, I'm just gonna say even difference,
Yep.
um, because that asset view is missing.
mhm.
And their students' behavior isn't always about you.
Yeah.
How do you decenter yourself
Yeah,
from what's happening?
yeah.
So I just kept thinking about like decenter yourself. Not everything
Mhm,
is about you, right? But if you're, you know, if you move through the world and the world typically centers you, right?
mhm.
How do you open your eyes? Kind of going back to what you said, Kevin, right? Like you realize your eyes open. And now once your eyes are open, you see and you notice it happening all the time. So,
And you really need to work to stay open because we get drawn into thinking about things in a certain way, and our culture, particularly in education, takes us down that road. When I studied here at Cal Poly, we were starting a new teacher prep program, and we had this progression of courses teaching elementary PE in one quarter. That was taught in the elementary school. Teaching middle school PE was taught in the middle school. Teaching high school PE taught in the high school. And they had the elementary and the middle school classes here in San Luis Obispo in very white schools. And our students weren't being exposed to difference. They weren't being exposed to the kids of the state of California. And I got in real trouble when I said, no, I'm going to take my high school class down to Santa Maria High School. And I walked my class into Santa Maria High School, which is 99% Hispanic. And this bunch of white kids coming onto campus with me that they were all uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, this is great. And it became very much what you were saying about not centering the experience on you
mhm,
and thinking about the assets that the students bring. And it went from an experience that got me in trouble a little bit with my colleagues because I was not supposed to be doing this, to everybody very quickly realizing that this was a heck of a good idea and this was a real asset to our program because it was just it was taking a different perspective. And I don't think my colleagues realized that what they were doing was perpetuating these racist, white supremacist
mm,
perspectives
mhm.
in their curriculum, but it absolutely was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and just by then taking my students into the school that was so different and such a contrast, but so much more about the demographic of people in California, it really changed a lot of conversations amongst the students, the teacher prep students, our students. And it was very asset based. And the curriculum at the school um, uh, they had built in a vocab builder, daily words. And so my students were doing micro teaching and they had to go through the vocab words with the students. And I challenge my students to then learn the English vocab words because they were always English vocab words, learn the Spanish. and try to model for the students that they too could learn a new language, and help the students see that being bilingual was a massive asset, rather
Oh, yeah.
than as sadly a lot of their teachers, even at Santa Maria High School at that time, were were not seeing their Spanish language skills as an asset. Uh,
Yeah.
that really floored me, and it was a real became a real focus of teaching us.
Yeah. I love that. Make good trouble, right? Like, take a risk, use your voice. This is how the change happens, right? Like, that's a perfect example to me of that making good trouble. So, rest in peace, John Lewis, because we should all be making good trouble. Bree's like, snaps. I know you can't see her all, y'all, but she was snapping here in the video. But okay, so I want to talk about, I feel like we could talk about this for days because I feel like I want to talk about, like how people were told to assimilate and speaking Spanish was bad and you needed to speak English. But we're not going to digress there today because I could definitely go down that road. But so thinking about the center, do you guys call it like CTAP? Do you guys have a, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, see that.
So CTAP. All right, CTAP. Um, how did it it came about, right? So you saw this need and we put together the center. So I would love to kind of hear more about the creation of the center and its goals for supporting
Mhm.
educators because we know there's not enough
Yeah,
educators of color in the field right now.
absolutely. And in California, what the population of Black, the Black population period is very low, right? Like even though we say, oh, it's, a minority state or what have you, but there are people of color where it is still very minoritized, even within the space. So we were working together through the chancellor's office and we were saying, there's this funding. It was through Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we wanted to get some of that and see like if they could help because that was at the time they were funding centers for transformation, centers for supporting teachers of color. And
Mhm.
so we said, let's get on board. Let's see what we can do. And so what we did was we first requested I guess like a development grant,
Mhm.
so a smaller amount to just create the center. And then thereafter we requested, 3 million to run the center. And so we're sunsetting on both of, all of that now. But for the past 4 years, we've really dug into this work. And
Mhm.
now we're at the space for sustainability.
Mhm.
So the center started with us thinking about our mission and vision. Who are we? What are we going to say? What is our ultimate goal, right? Throughout all of this. And keywords that come out of what we were doing and what we are doing and what we believe is, the idea behind disrupting systemic oppression. Like
Mhm.
we say that, that our goal as the CSU, which is, we educate what over 50%, maybe like 60% of the educators in California. So to disrupt systemic oppression and to engage with socially just educational practices and to
Mhm.
learn and understand what that is, but through all of it, moving towards that transformation of an equitable system, equitable structures, programs, or what have you throughout. And our goal was to not only reach the 20 of the 23 CSU campuses, but to spread and to share what we're doing so others
Mhm.
throughout the country can also be a part or learn from or collaborate with our
Mhm.
center as we move toward this. And so that's, that vision throughout. And we also, with that, we built these three prongs, if you will, of like what
Mhm.
we use to be able to fulfill the need of a center.
This brings us to the end of part 1 of our 2-part series with Dr. Kevin Taylor and Dr. Bre Evans-Santiago. I want to thank you both and everyone listening for joining me today with the Dragonfly Rising podcast. I'm going to encourage you to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss part 2 of this amazing conversation 2 weeks from now, where we'll learn more about the CTEP Center and all of the things that they are doing there to disrupt systems of equity and to provide support to others looking to replicate this vision and support social justice. So I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks and hearing from you. But in the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And head on over to Instagram and give me a follow at Dragonfly Rising LLC, and let me know if there's something else you'd like to hear in the future on the podcast, or if you have any questions for today's guests. So I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you soon. This wraps up another episode of the Dragonfly Rising podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember that action is always greater than inaction. How will you use your voice today?